The agenda this week considered the case of Omar Khadr, evaluated the economic platforms of the four federal parties, and examined Green Party leader Elizabeth May's plans for the country. The agenda's week in review begins with a decade of conservative economics. How significant, in your view, is the drop of oil prices to the overall health of the Canadian economy today?
Oh, it's substantial. We've now got an economy in recession, at least by one definition of the term. We are seeing economic weakness in Saskatchewan that's running a deficit for the first time in a while. Alberta's hurting, and Newfoundland and Labrador is particularly suffering. So overall, this has taken billions and billions out of the economy, caused all kinds of problems that we're seeing in people's pensions. We're feeling it in the Canadian dollar, and as well as have taken billions of dollars out of the federal government's coffers, which is leading all of the parties to have to make some difficult decisions.
Jim, how about you on that?
Likewise, there's no doubt the pain that we're feeling from lower oil reflects the kind of structural remaking of Canada's economy over the last decade. We have become much more reliant on petroleum extraction and other kind of raw and resource extraction. And that means when the prices come down, and they always come down, you know, anyone who thought the price of oil could only go one way was obviously ignoring history. So when it came back down, we were left more exposed, and we are feeling those side effects.
Can I do a little follow-up, Jim, with you on the question I asked Elena as well? You know, if people go to the gas pumps and it costs a lot less to buy gas than it used to, say, a year and a half ago, or if they're taking a flight and airlines are paying so much less for fuel now than they would have a year and a half ago, I mean, theoretically, that's good for the economy.
Oh, certainly. There are some benefits as well as costs. It isn't a one-way street. Consumers benefit on lower energy prices. Energy-using industries, you mentioned transportation, but there's other industries. Some manufacturers, for example, very energy-intensive. They're experiencing big savings on the cost side. So there are some benefits. The silver lining in the cloud, of course, is what the oil price has meant for the Canadian dollar, which has made everything we sell in the rest of the world, manufacturers, services, tourism, much more appealing. Look at our tourism numbers, finally turning around after a dismal decade. So there are some positives, but on a net basis, it's clear that the harm has outweighed the good so far.
Mike, you agree with that? On a net basis, the harm outweighs the good?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there had been some discussion around this point, but we saw the Bank of Canada weigh in on that, and they're saying in their structural models that you know, the downside, what it means for the oil and gas industry, outweighs the benefits to manufacturing, to some of our service exports, to tourism, which isn't much of a surprise because we are a net exporter of oil, and generally speaking, anything that you sell, if the price of that goes down, that's a bad thing for you.
You know, Steve, one industry which uses oil as an input is oil refining. Obviously, duh, you don't need a PhD in economics to realize that. But the refining and processing business has become enormously profitable, while the production side is obviously suffering. And one of the reasons that I think we're experiencing that net negative is precisely because we have not taken advantage of our own energy to do more refining and processing here in Canada. We've actually become a net importer of refined petroleum products, if you can believe that. So that possible upside is one that I think we've kind of squandered.
Mike, the joy of being in the middle of a very long election campaign right now is that it has actually given Canadians a bit of an opportunity, I suspect, to discuss at the kitchen table how much of an impact any government can actually have in improving the economy. And we've seen various, you know, the parties have all got their plans out there for doing just that. But let me ask you the question. How much can a government do to actually significantly improve the economic health of any country at any particular time?
Well, there's not much they can do in the short run. So governments always take far too much credit when things are going well, which this government was wont to do, and take far too much blame when things are going poorly. That if we had this election 18 months ago, regardless of who would have won that election, they'd be going through these difficulties. What the federal government can do and should do is make plans that go 5, 10, 15 years down the line to strengthen the long-run growth of the economy, but they don't control the day-to-day price of oil or what's going on in China or anything like that.
The main criticism of Prime Minister Harper that one hears is that even though he's an economist, he has kind of put too many eggs, if I can put it this way, in the you know, resource basket, and he hasn't championed a diversification of the Canadian economy enough. What are you hearing people say about whether that's a fair criticism?
I think there are a couple of parts to that answer. the question of whether other policies and other strategies should have been deployed to make parts of the economy more dynamic, manufacturing, et cetera, I think is one question you can ask, you know, and that's a legitimate question. I think in terms of Canada's dependence on commodities, it may be not entirely fair to blame this government or even the last few governments for a structural economic model that's been part of our country for centuries. And what another interesting way of looking at it is to think about other rich countries that have similarly been very badly hit during this downturn, not just by crude, but by mining. So Canada's got a double whammy right now. We've got crude oil, but also mining. Base metal prices have collapsed, iron ore, and that's another big part of our economy. If you add up energy and mining, some would argue that directly and indirectly, those industries account for about 23% of the Canadian economy. And if you compare with other countries, look at, for example, Norway, Australia, other very well-off countries, OECD countries that are similarly dependent on those industries, no one else is skating through this either. And neither of those countries, despite their wealth, Norway is a really interesting example, has managed to create a really diversified economy. It's very, very hard to wean yourself off a rich resource sector, especially when things are going well.
In which case, Jennifer, unfair to say that Prime Minister Harper hasn't been an adequate champion for the further diversification of the Canadian economy? What's your view?
Well, I would say that in reality, politicians can do very little to affect the economy, and it's only over the long term. They can affect the economy through taxes and government expenditure, but that's still only minor long-term effects. And in terms of the dependence of the Canadian economy on the resource sector, the reality is that the resource sector has generated a good return on investment, and that's why it's been successful in the boom. And I'm not sure that there is, or no, I am sure that there shouldn't be a role for government in interfering in that and, you know, propping up other industries that aren't doing as well.
Jeffrey, you're in Calgary. What are people saying in Stephen Harper's adopted hometown now about whether or not he hasn't diversified the economy enough?
Well, I mean, the oil industry could not argue credibly that they have not had a government that has been probably the most sympathetic to its aims ever. So I mean, it's diversification of the national economy has not been an issue in this province, you know, probably until very recently. And sort of one side of this, of what had happened during the so-called commodity super cycle was that the Canadian dollar took off, making manufacturing in other parts of the country a much weaker proposition. Now that we've gone from super cycle to stupor cycle, we've seen a little bit of response in manufacturing and other parts of the economy as the Canadian dollar has weakened, but it certainly has not roared back to any extent that people had predicted before. Not even close.
You've made it a point a few times out there, certainly at the end of the televised debate and then certainly in your kickoff speech as well. You've said, we're not the Green Party you think we used to be. We're not this one issue and that's all we're about. We're about so much more than that. So give me one or two or three issues here right now that people won't know traditionally are associated with the Green Party that you think they ought to know.
Well, we've always been a party about more than one issue, and we have 6 core green values that Green parties all around the world pay attention to, ascribe to, including social justice and human rights. In terms of our platform this time around, we're right now the party that's saying the most about healthcare. And we have a very complete platform that goes to looking at how do we incorporate alternative complementary medicine? What do we do to ensure the security and durability of our single-payer universal healthcare system? And take it to its next steps, which for us, right away is pharmacare. Makes a lot of sense to have a national pharmacare plan and bring down the cost of prescription drugs, as well as make sure everyone can afford them. Another one of our policies that people may not know about is our commitment to changing the way we make decisions in Canada. We're very excited about promoting a council of Canadian governments, because in the 21st century, we can't keep operating the way the Constitution structured us in 1867. We need to recognize the huge significance of the municipal order of government. So we want to bring to the same table federal, provincial, territorial, municipal, local governments, as well as First Nations, Métis, and Inuit.
You know, the Prime Minister, the current Prime Minister, does not like to sit down with other other levels of government, because he says it turns into a big bun fight and everybody gangs up on the federal government and it achieves nothing. And there is some evidence to support that position. How would your council of the not council, what do you call it?
Yeah, Council of the Canadian
Council
Governments.
of Canadian Governments. How would that avoid that?
Well, you know, we modeled it on something in Australia, the Council of, not surprisingly, the Council of Australian Governments. Seems to work there. I think there really isn't much evidence that it helps Canada to refuse to talk to the premiers. I think the evidence is very clear that dropping the health accord puts the sustainability of our healthcare system at risk. Refusing to talk to the provinces about coming up with an energy plan. I mean,
he talks to the provinces, Ms. May. He just doesn't talk to them all together in one table with the cameras on.
I don't think there's much evidence that we've had any effort to develop national goals or national strategies since Stephen Harper became Prime Minister 9 years ago. And it would certainly be to the benefit of Canadians to see all orders of government sit down, roll up their sleeves, and figure out how to work together in the same way that I want to in the House of Commons in a minority parliament, work across party lines. We work better when we work together.
Let me pick up on pharmacare. Maybe we haven't had much talk about healthcare in general and pharmacare in particular because it's a provincial jurisdictional issue. Quebec probably wouldn't participate in any national scheme. And have you talked to all the premiers about whether or not they'd be open to that kind of thing?
Look, I've talked to the Canadian Medical Association, I've talked to the experts there's a terrific report called Pharmacare 2020. Professor Steve Morgan at UBC, Daniel Martin here in Toronto, as well as experts from Harvard and around the world participated in that. It doesn't intrude on provincial jurisdiction to have a federal crown agency that negotiates directly head-to-head with the pharmaceutical industry and gets a bulk buying process that reduces the price. We're paying way more than we need to, and provinces don't have to buy the drugs through the federal Pharmacare Crown Corporation. They can go pay more if they want to, but I don't think they will.
Bill C-51.
Yes.
You're against it.
Yes.
You'd repeal it.
Yes.
Replace it with anything?
Let me say that that bill was tabled on January 30th. I was the first member of the House of Commons to condemn it the following Monday. It was tabled on Friday. February 2nd, I stood up in the House, and I used the language that was used in a Globe and Mail editorial describing it as a secret police act, to howls of derision from the Conservative benches. That bill is simply the most anti-democratic and dangerous piece of legislation in our history. It certainly must be repealed. There are 5 separate sections to the bill. I know them intimately. There is nothing there worth saving, Steve. It should be repealed. If we need to amend our laws around removing propaganda from the internet, we can, but there's so much dangerous in that bill. It makes us less able to confront terrorist plots and threats. That's something that hasn't come across nearly clearly enough. The concerns in the RCMP, what happens when CSIS is able to disrupt plots without bothering to tell the RCMP what they're doing.
What's the most important thing we need to know about your party's future plans for the economy? The most important thing.
The most important thing is that we're going to offer Canadians, and specifically Ontarians, stability. That we're going to protect the economy. We've shown that we can do it in the past. We know we can do it in the future. And our plan is pretty simple, Steve. It's lower taxes, it's a balanced budget, and all that leads to creating jobs.
Andrew Thompson.
Well, we are also going to provide a balanced budget. We know that there has to be a stable business environment for companies to work in, but there also have to be targeted incentives. We've seen far too much emphasis placed on the resource sector alone to carry the economy. There has to be now reinvestment in those key areas of the Ontario economy like manufacturing, innovation, and technology. And we'll make sure that we're partnering to do that.
Sorry, Krista Freeland?
What we are offering is an agenda for investment in jobs and growth. We understand that where we are today is not good enough. We understand that our economy is sluggish at best. We understand we have an infrastructure deficit. We understand that interest rates have never been so low. So we believe in an ambitious agenda for Ontario and the country. We're going to invest in it. And unfortunately, when you hear from other parties talking about a balanced budget, that's really a code for cuts. We don't think now is the time for cuts and austerity.
That's what we shall discuss over the next half an hour. Gordon Miller.
Well, the other parties are focused on GDP growth, jobs, these dollar figure things. So I think you have to look at the Green Party platform in terms of quality, prosperity, true prosperity, quality of life, security of person, and enjoyment in the community. That's the kind of focus we have in establishing our budget, not just money and not just making foreign national corporations rich with capital investments.
Let's pick up on the issue of deficits, because that is one of the areas which separates, I think, all four of your parties. Your party got some good news yesterday.
Yeah, we did.
Only insofar as the budget is not in deficit. It actually is got a little bit of a surplus happening there.
Well, what we showed is what we said we were going to do, which was we recognized that deficits had to be gone into as a result of this recession that we started experiencing in 2008, 2009, but we always had a plan to come out of deficit. And we came out a little bit earlier than had anticipated, but that's because we're very conservative, both in terms of party, but also in terms of how we forecast. And it was very nice to see that we have a surplus going into this year, or coming out of last year. We'll have a surplus going into next year.
You sure about that?
Because we showed, you know what, the Prime Minister said very clearly yesterday that he has great faith and he's great confidence in the fact that we will see a surplus next year as well. $5 billion surplus in the first quarter is pretty good, and it's just showing that our plan is working. What doesn't work is increasing taxes, especially on corporate taxes, and running deficits, which causes instability and confidence in the economy.
Would you acknowledge that part of that $5 billion surplus showing so far is because you sold GM shares and therefore the books look a little better than they might otherwise?
Hey, you know what? Are you going to turn your back on a $3 billion surplus without the GM shares?
But the point is it's a one-off, right? It's a one-off.
It's still a $3 billion surplus, Steve.
Okay.
It's a good surplus, and it's more than what they're going to do, because they're not going to balance the books.
Well, I'm amazed when the Conservatives say they've been following this great plan, and then they're surprised that all of a sudden this budget got balanced. I mean, this is I've never seen such a happy group of Conservatives over their plans. Wow, maybe working. The problem is it's actually not working, because we've had 10 years of a lost decade under the Conservatives. It's good that on their 7th try, they've finally been able to balance the budget, but $150 billion worth of built-up debt. Now, I know the Liberals want to add to that. What we're saying is it's good the budget is finally balanced. This gives us all a good position to work from, so that we can start to make those investments back into the economy for growth, make the investments back into working families.
I suspect what one of the most important questions is here, and that is how well will these refugees eventually manage to create a life for themselves in their new countries and integrate into European society. And to that end, the number of Muslims in Europe has grown from almost 30 million in 1990 to 44 million in the year 2010. Europe's Muslim population is projected to exceed 58 million by 2030. And in terms of individual countries, here's how it breaks down. Austria, from 2010 to 2030, we're looking at nearly a doubling. In Denmark, up a bit. In Germany, up a couple of points. In Sweden, virtually doubled. In the UK, virtually doubled. And in Bulgaria, up a couple of points. By comparison, in the United States, less than 1% in 2010, anticipated to be 1.7% in 2030. And in Canada, 2.8%, trending towards 6.6%. This, of course, is Pew Research from a few years ago. Given the current wave of population, these percentages could all be higher going forward. Let's look at the integration efforts. Lars, you know Sweden very well. What mark would you give Sweden's efforts in terms of integrating its new Muslim population into the broader population?
There are some serious problems, it's clear. We have a situation in Sweden where the way into Swedish society is really through work, through employment. Sweden has very, very high rates when it comes to labor market participation, much higher than the European average, and that applies to both men and women. Their gender equality is very, very important here. And here we, of course, we see that the immigrants coming, especially those who are coming that are refugees, Sweden stands out by having much larger proportion of refugee immigrants relative to labor immigrants. And many of them are outside of the labor market. And if you're outside of the labor market, that usually is associated with segregation when it comes to housing and an isolation from the Swedish population at large. So I would say that this here is the key challenge. And this comes at a time when we, as opposed to Germany, in Sweden, see, right, relatively high unemployment rates that hit also young people in Sweden who grew up there. So it is a very bad moment to have very, very large volumes of migrants coming in with relatively low skills as far as participation in a very sophisticated labor market. There are not that many entry-level jobs, particularly not so in Sweden. So I would argue, and I think many, many people agree, that the goodwill and the good intentions of the relatively open policies in Sweden that has, you know, by per capita, the highest rates, right, of immigrants in Europe right now. This is out of whack, right, with the labor market. And this is very different from the high rates of immigration that we saw in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s in a context of a demand for labor. So I think that the marks right now are fairly low, and it's a pretty serious situation over the medium term.
Let me go to Josef first and then Faizi on the German situation. Josef, what can you tell us about how well new Muslim immigrant communities are adapting to life in Germany and being embraced by the broader population?
Very informal polling of the refugees, only about 10–12% of them have a university degree, and only 1/3 of the young have a kind of completed vocational training. So the people coming in are not ideally prepared for this, you know, the economy as Lars described it, modern economy. These are problems that are going to face us down the road. For the time being, and I assume it's the same in Sweden as in Germany, there's a very generous welfare state which shelters people, which gives them food and clothes and furniture, plus an enormous wave of individual giving. It looks like the typical immigrant dream. You know, take the United States, take New York. You start out in the Lower East Side. Your father goes to Midtown and City College of New York, and the son, and the next one goes to Harvard. That American dream or Canadian dream doesn't seem to be working. Again, very anecdotal. I'm stressing that in the Turkish community, where you see second and third generation doing less well than the parents. So the father came in, you worked at a car factory at good wages. The kids maybe school dropouts and they're driving taxis. But one last point, in Germany, I assume also in Sweden, we are doing a lot better than, say, in France, where for generations, African, Arab immigrants have been penned up in the banlieue with apparently no real way out. But to conclude, it's a very open question. How are we going to deal with this in the longer run?
Faizi, could you add to that as to whether or not the pushback you're seeing against these migrants is more an anti-immigrant thing or more an anti-Muslim thing?
I would slightly differ from Professor Jofe's analysis of the third generation Turkish community in Germany, for instance, because I have done research on third generation Turkish Germans.
That's your background too, isn't
That's
it?
right,
Yeah.
that's right, yes. And they're not, of course, they're never called Turkish Germans because they don't hyphenate them over there as we do in Canada. And, but the thing is that, I mean, when you talk to them, many of these third generation, is that they still complain that they're called outsiders and foreigners. So, you know, in Canada, for instance, we don't call, you know, second or third generation immigrant kids as outsiders, but in Germany, there are, you know, all sorts of official terms to designate them. So, you know, it goes both ways. And Germany, France, and I think they're having a difficulty accepting the idea of having different people living in the midst of them as they are, but that's a larger question.
There are around 10% Bulgarian Turks, basically Muslims living in Bulgaria. If you see their attitude towards basically the refugees coming from Syria, it's not much different than Bulgarian population as a whole. So from this point of view, I don't believe that it is simply kind of a religious divide or even ethnic divide. We're talking about, in my view, something even bigger. The open borders and globalization was perceived as a huge promise for all these societies. And now we start to see also the dark side of it. And till yesterday, the basic question was how to manage globalization. I do believe that now Europe is facing a problem how to manage a backlash against globalization.
Why did you take his case in the first place?
I've been asked that recently, and I'm not sure how I can answer that. I had been reading about Guantanamo Bay. I'm a lawyer. As a lawyer, I say we're all committed to justice. If we're not there just to earn money, we're there also because we have this title as a lawyer. We're there to do good work. And it offended me. And I couldn't believe that there was a child in this hellhole called Guantanamo Bay. And so out of some naivete, I decided to see what I could do to assist him.
You did not imagine, I imagine, that this would take more than a decade of your life.
I was so naive. I had no idea that what I was doing. I recall that first visit with Omar when I left him, and I said to him, I'll be back. And he said to me, everybody leaves me. Words to that effect. And I, in a bravado type of way, I said, I won't leave you. And there are many times, I have to tell you, that I've wanted to leave and walk away. I had no idea of the challenges I would face or the length of time to be involved.
You glad you stuck around?
Absolutely.
He eventually pleads guilty and receives an 8-year sentence. And I wonder if you could help us understand what went into that decision.
Well, you have to understand the trial. But, my mother, at times, as I grew up, would accuse me of not behaving well. She would say things like, you should be ashamed of yourself. Well, she'll have to tell you what it was I did that made her ashamed of me. But I've never been ashamed of being a lawyer, at least until I participated in that fictional trial called Guantanamo Bay. Omar had no witnesses called on his behalf, not allowed in, even though I'd spent a whole summer at getting together with a whole list of witnesses. Torture evidence was allowed in, a hand-picked jury, but 6 of them were from the same office, a judge who didn't know the law. It was just a mockery. And so I realized at some point that Omar Khadr was never going to get out. Because notwithstanding the fact that had the jury agreed that he was innocent, which would be an impossibility with the way it was set up, indefinite detention was still on the table. The American government still was sticking to their right to keep him in Guantanamo indefinitely.
So find an agreement, find a compromise, and get him out of there.
Well, contrary to people's opinions, the Americans wanted Omar Khadr out. And they wanted him out probably a couple of years earlier. And the Canadian government was not responding to overtures. It took Hillary Clinton to step up and face Prime Minister Harper, who had to really respond to her and couldn't ignore. And what happened, as you know, he was given an 8-year sentence with 1 year to serve back in Guantanamo. But the Canadian government didn't carry through with this agreement. It took 2 years before they agreed to take Omar back. And they only agreed to take him back because the Americans put him on a plane and flew him back here.
The radical group that you joined, I'm not going to say it well, but Hizb ut-Tahrir?
Hizb ut-Tahrir, you can call it HT as a short for the acronym.
HT.
Yeah.
Did you have a particular role in this group?
I joined as a recruit, but I eventually ended up on the leadership committee of this organization and was responsible for exporting and founding franchises from Britain in Pakistan, in Denmark, and eventually in Egypt.
Okay, Egypt. You ended up in prison in Egypt.
Yeah.
How did that happen?
I arrived, so fast forward from me joining 10 years later, I arrived in Egypt ostensibly for my studies. I was studying law and Arabic at the University of London.
There's a picture of you.
That's right, that's my mugshot actually, in Mazra'at Tora prison in Cairo. And I arrived in Egypt one day before the 9/11 attacks. And of course the entire world changed after then, and I wasn't prepared for the way in which the security climate would change. So 10 months roughly after my arrival, I was arrested by the Egyptian state security. I was blindfolded. I had my hands tied behind my back with rags, and I was taken to their dungeons in Cairo, in a building known as Al-Gihaz, where they began torturing everyone via electrocution.
If you don't want to, it's okay, but do you want to be more specific about what they did to you then?
So I got away without being electrocuted. What they did instead, aside from the beatings, which were nothing in comparison to what they were doing to others, they were torturing people by electrocuting their teeth and their genitalia. And they were forcing me to watch that and then asking me questions off the back of that. And the reason I got away is still a mystery to me, because it wasn't because I was British. They tortured a British citizen, my fellow inmate, in front of me, and you know, played our questions off each other. So they had actually, they threatened me. They said, we will do the same to you in within 12 hours if you don't confess to everything.
Confess to what?
Coming to Egypt to work for HT, my organization, and working to resurrect a caliphate in Egypt.
Neither of which were actually your goals, I'm gathering.
Well, I was actually recruiting for the organization, but I wasn't there in Egypt for that purpose. But within the 12 hours, the embassy had intervened, and this is 4 days later. But the 12-hour window they'd given me, within that, the embassy intervened and got us out of the torture dungeons and into solitary confinement, where we spent the next 4 months. Eventually, we were sentenced to 5 years in Mazra'at Tora prison, which is where that mugshot was taken that you showed on the screen.
How old were you at the time?
24 years old.
Did you think you were going to die?
Yes.
And then comes George Orwell's Animal Farm.
Indeed.
How did that influence your life at this moment?
You see, Orwell's genius is, I think, it's yet to be matched in the way in which he takes, or took, writing and political subjects, and was able to write through fiction, really meaningful and timeless works. If you look at 1984 today, and if you look at Animal Farm today, you change the theme from communism to jihadist terrorism, and it's the same thing. How I felt I was living in Egypt in prison, I felt I was living in the jihadist equivalent of Orwell's Animal Farm. You know, the pigs had started walking on hind legs, and they were running the show. In that block, the cell block we were in, the jihadists were running the show. And it was the first time I'd come up close and lived with, in proximity to, those whom I had lionized growing up, people I considered heroes. And I was finally living with them. And I came to see their mannerisms, their behavior, their ideas up close and implemented on the rest of their cellmates in that cell block. And I came to the conclusion, and this is long before ISIS declared the so-called caliphate, I came to the conclusion, if these people ever come to power, it will be hell on earth. We were having conversations about slavery and its legitimacy, debates around amputation of limbs and stoning adulteresses. And in a way, I really didn't want to live in that type of place. And so when I finished my sentence and I was released from prison, I not only left Hizb ut-Tahrir, but I decided to dedicate the rest of my time and energies in challenging what I now consider and call the Islamist ideology as distinct from Islam, the faith.
And that is the Agenda's Week in Review. You can see all of those programs in their entirety at tvo.org, on our iTunes channel, and on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/theagenda.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit supporttvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.